with our guests here, John and Robbie, is to see what we can do to put pressure on those conversations to ensure what these guys are calling minimal necessities for a livable planet assured. So I'm very grateful to our speakers, John Jordan and Robbie Gillett, and to my old friends and colleague and collaborator tonight, Jamie Kelsey, the New Internationalist, and also to Chloe Griffiths and Danny Davis, who have helped set this event up. I'm going to hand over to Jamie actually to introduce our speakers for tonight. Thanks.
Yeah, hi. I'm going to be really brief. So as Adam said, I work for a magazine called New Internationalist, but also I've been involved in what you might call activism or direct action or civil disobedience since I was a teenager. And apart from Occupy, which I thought was amazing, outside St Paul's for 4.5 months, I think without doubt this is the defining issue of our times. He just used the cat word, catastrophic. But it is looking catastrophic, and it seems sometimes as if we're just ambling blindly towards a total disaster where you can't even look your children in the face if you haven't done anything. But what do you do? So if you're involved in activism for a long time, you know that marching from A to B can be pretty inconsequential. And if we're talking about Paris, where the climate conference is going to be happening, we have to learn from our lessons in Copenhagen. In Copenhagen in 2009, the people who are using civil disobedience, the sort of direct action groups that were there, who were trying to kind of raise awareness about the fact that our leaders don't seem to be able to make the changes that we need, we were really crushed, really vilely treated. People ended up being put in cages stacked high. So it's important to look at how you take action and how do you innovate on it and be creative about it, rather than marching from A to B or dropping a banner. Now, I'm 51. When I was a youngster, we had these incredible things happen in this city called Reclaim the Streets. Thousands and thousands of people, way before Twitter or Facebook, thousands and thousands of people would turn up and just shut down entire areas of London. And they were incredibly successful doing that. If you look at Naomi Klein's popular book, No Logo, she starts by saying, I'm writing this basically because I was so inspired by Reclaim the Streets. One of your speakers tonight, John, is one of the people who was behind that movement. Now, when we were shutting down entire areas of the city, if you said, you bunch of bloody activists, I wouldn't have thought we were an activist at all. I would have thought that this is where it's at, this is what young people should be doing, not like we're political or anything like that. And then you move on from that to the G8, when they had a meeting in Edinburgh in 2005. Huge amounts of police. There was a huge camp that we had, thousands of people from around the world, but police were surrounding it the whole time, and you don't want violence. How do you innovate so that it just doesn't become a conflict? I'll tell you how. You invent the clown army, which is what John Jordan did. So you have a huge line of riot police here, huge line of black bloc here, and then suddenly a dozen people painted as clowns but in army fatigues, and they were training every morning. They really were well trained. They came between the two fighting lines with one leaf above their heads, and they're going, they can't see us. We're camouflaged, they can't see us. The black bloc are going, woi. The cops, and this is on film, the police are going, one of them says, you can hear him on camera, he's saying, what we do about the clowns, Sarge? Truly, what I'm saying is true. And eventually, the Sarge says, okay, tactical, what's it called? Tactical withdrawal. And you see all these police getting away from the clowns and all the black bloc going away from the clowns. That's why we're here today. And this is why we're calling this together in CSN. We need creativity. We need that kind of brilliant innovation. The way to win this is not by conflict. We all know that. The way to win this is by just making it patently obvious and patently brilliant that this species needs to come together despite what's happening in the conference centre. And we come together and create something that actually can bring the change that we need. And it's down to us. It's not down to our political leaders. It's certainly not down to the corporations that are trying to influence them. It's down to us as individuals. And it's your generation. I'm an old guy. I remember punk rock. I remember seeing the band Landing on the Moon. I remember this guy, the vicar, local vicar. I was playing with his kids. Come and look at this. And he put us in front of the TV. I remember seeing Man Land on the Moon. I'm that old. When I go, things will be really, really bad. But if we do go to 3.5 degrees, which is exactly what is being predicted, then it just doesn't bear worth thinking about. I'm not going to get into that whole scare thing, but it really doesn't bear worth thinking about. So what are we going to do? And we need you to help us. And one of the ways to get you excited is to get someone like John Jordan and the amazing Robbie Gillett from Reclaim the Power to turn you on. So, over to John.
I'm going to use it. Yeah, I've got this. Hi everyone. So I'm going to give a bit of kind of context of kind of how artists and how the collective I work in have brought art and activism together. So a handful of strategies for creative disobedience. But because at the root of disobedience is the body, in a way, I think the material I use most as an artist and as an activist is the body. I'm going to start with a little exercise. So I'm going to ask some questions, and if the questions are true for you, I want you to stand up and stay standing up, okay? So if there are any women in the audience who've ever worn trousers, ever in their life, can you stand up and stay standing up? And if there are anyone, man or woman, who's ever used contraception, coitus interruptus doesn't count. So, the pill, condoms, etc. Can you stand up? Stay standing up. Is there anyone who's taken a weekend off work? Can you stand up? Or been a member of a union, ridden a bike as a child? I think everyone's standing up. Okay, so what do you have in common? Very good. I've done that hundreds of times, and only twice has anyone got the answer right. So congratulations. You can sit down. So basically, all those rights were won through disobedience. Every single one of those rights. No government gave us those rights. Those rights were won because people broke the law. People went to jail for the right for people to use contraceptions. People like Emma Goldman. But she went to jail several times for handing out leaflets about contraception. As Oscar Wilde says, disobedience in the eye of anyone who has read history is our original virtue. It's through disobedience and rebellion that progress has been made. Number 2, we've never been here before. So just a bit of context about kind of my background. So I originally trained in theatre. Theatre, they said, there's a gap between the audience and the performers. Sometimes there's a big hole. And the audience and performers shouldn't really meet. Then I went to art college because I really hated that thing, and I was told, art and life shouldn't really be together, and actually don't make your work political because that's really instrumental and it's rubbish. You've got to be separate from society. And you've got to watch society. You've got to watch things.
What do you think?
Oh my God. I knew it was going to happen. It's wonderful.
Were you happy?
Yeah.
Were you able to get it? Did you get it?
I think so.
All right.
That was a big one. That's the grand.
So if you hear it at the end, as the woman says, that's the grand fin. She doesn't quite get the word finale. So what's happening there? It's rich tourists basically going to watch the glaciers calving. It costs about $20,000 per trip. And as you can see, the really kind of very poetic way that one of the companies that runs these cruises, thunder doesn't just come from the sky. Glaciers creak, rumble, and carve explosively with stupendous roar, often referred to as white thunder. And then they say, you know, come and see one of the greatest shows on earth, and you can see it all up close with Prince's Cruises. So basically, we're watching. We're all spectators. And climate, in a way, is an issue of rich and poor. Most of those people on that ship, many probably come from, say, let's say, New York State. And in New York State alone, the 19 million inhabitants of New York State, they use more energy than the 900 million inhabitants of sub-Saharan Africa. Climate isn't just about species, it's about us. Refugees, right now, we have about 30 million ecological refugees. Most of the studies show that by 2050, there'll be about 200 million ecological refugees. 150 million of those just due to climate. And I think for me, one of the best ways of looking at climate is that it's a war on the poor. It's a war on the poor created by a system, created by rich people and lifestyles by people like us. And it's not an individual issue. It's not that we have to use less water for our toothbrush. I mean, the recent report in The Guardian showed that actually, since the start of the industrial era, 2/3 of all the CO2 emissions were just 90 corporations. So 90 corporations were responsible for 2/3 of all the CO2. The UN climate talks in Paris are happening, and already they've admitted that it will not go to a 2-degree agreement. What does that mean? The only thing that the UN has agreed on in terms of the science, the scientists have all said it cannot go above 2 degrees. Over 2 degrees, we go into feedback. We go into the possibility of going to 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 to 7 degrees. It flips after 2 degrees. And the only thing the UN has kind of promised is that we won't go over 2 degrees. But already for Paris, they've said, actually, the agreement will go to 3. Or 2.7 at the moment is what is being promised. What does that mean? It means pretty much that we'll have an atmosphere like Mars. And there's not a lot of life left on Mars. Now, you don't mobilize people through catastrophe. You don't mobilize people through telling them, you know, we're hitting this apocalypse. Stephen Duncan wrote an amazing book called Dream, Reimagining Progressive Politics in an Age of Fantasy. And he says, politics is not solely or even primarily about reasoned thinking and rational choices. It's an affair of fantasy and desire. People are rarely moved to action, support, or even consent by realistic proposals. They're motivated by dreams of what could be. And that's where us as artists come in. Because we can create the dreams. We are able to create the dreams. And dreams are what motivates movements. And I think right now we need movements that are similar to the civil rights movements that were happening in the 50s and 60s in the US. So imagine you're in the US, you've got segregation, you have shops where white people are only allowed into, black people aren't allowed into the same door as white people, you've got segregated restaurants, you get segregated restrooms, etc. So what did the movements do about it? They didn't think, oh, we're going to create a load of art and popular education and workshops and flyers and to make people conscious. We're not going to, we're not going to suddenly convert white people to no longer be racist. If they thought that was the strategy, there'd still be segregation in the US. What they said is we're going to find the economic points of leverage. Because what makes a difference is when capitalism loses money. And what did they do? They looked at the buses. They were like, okay, who runs the buses? The white guys. The white guys run the bus systems. Who uses it? The black people. So coloured people use the buses. We will boycott the buses. So famously, Rosa Parks refused to give her seat to a white person, and the bus boycott took place. And of course, when the bus boycott took place, these corporations started to lose money. And what did they do? As soon as they started to lose money, they rang their MPs and went, hang on, this isn't on. You've got to do something. And the MPs changed the law. And the civil rights movement won. It won because it looked at economic leverage and it took direct action and civil disobedience against that leverage. It wasn't about raising consciousness. We know the problems. We all know the problems. The issue is how do we find the solutions and how do we create these leverage points? And for me, those leverage points were direct action. It was putting your body directly in the way of the destruction. And for me, I went to art college, I was a performance artist, I did all the stuff, taking my clothes off, nailing myself to shit, and inspired by people like Chris Burden. And then I kind of realized that actually it was always the same 500 people who came to watch it. And I was like, well, what's the point of doing this kind of work? So I started to do stuff outside, thinking, oh, well, if I do it outside, then, kind of maybe that will make a difference. And I was involved in a group called Platform in those days, and we did a project where we listened to the metabolism of the city, and we lived in a tent for 3 months in different parts of London. We looked at London as a kind of body in 1989, and we had this little windmill, and the windmill powered a TV. And one night, in summer of 89, I watched this, and everything changed for me.
No, not specifically in those terms. They got a museum consultant on board.
And a few days later, I decided to do a performance. I went onto London Bridge. It was rush hour, and I pushed a wheelbarrow of bones into the oncoming commuters going to work in the cities and the banks and so on. And I thought, this is what radical street performance should be. And everyone thought I was just crazy. People were just like, what the fuck are you doing? Go, you should be in a fucking lunatic asylum. Or, and this isn't art. I know what art is. Art is in the Tate Gallery, or, And so I soon realised that actually art gets in the way. Art can really get in the way. And so in the 90s, I decided to do what I call the Invisibility Trick. To make art, but just not call it art. And to make the art invisible. That involved things like setting up a fake, this was 1991, there are 75 buried rivers and streams running under London, and we set up a fake development agency to dig up the River Effra that runs through Brixton. And we used architects' models and so on, and people went in and they saw what we would do to dig up the river, and of course it was an artwork, we didn't have the budget to dig up a river, but no one knew that. And it got got loads of press as a development agency thing. I then did a whole load of work about men, heterosexual men's relationship to pornography. This is me, a bit younger, and which involved things like setting up fake sex shops and stuff in high streets. But we haven't got time to talk about that. We can talk about that in the pub if you want. And then I got involved in the direct action movement. It was 93, and there was an anti-roads movement going on, and I was involved in a movement to stop the building of the M11 link road in East London, which was going to destroy 350 houses, 2 ancient woodlands. And suddenly I saw performance that made sense. I saw performance that was pragmatic, that actually changed things. People tying themselves to bulldozers, tying themselves to trees, stopping the destruction. And I was like, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to apply my creativity to. And, try and do an opera with, white police horses running through the forest with mist and stuff. You'd never have the budget to do that in the And suddenly here, you could do it. And so everything changed. And I realized there was a certain beauty to it as well. There was something fundamentally beautiful about changing the world directly. Now, when you do that kind of work, you do escape what the art critic Susie Gablick calls the prisons of the art world. And you do find yourself a bit more often in the prisons of the real world. This is my clown, Colonel Klepto. Now, the good thing about this was when I was arrested here, the police note said I was a 22-year-old female and I was 40. So that was great. And the other thing is that, in the art world, when you break the canons, when you actually start to, innovate, you end up on the front pages of, Art Forum or Freeze or whatever. In the real world, when you actually start to break laws and disobey to make differences, you end up being called a domestic terrorist. This is me, in a police spotter card. But actually, I'm surrounded by my friends. Because what I realized was actually, in the world of movements, you're surrounded by solidarity. There isn't the competition that I felt was so strong in the art world. Number 4, make the movements the material. So for me, thinking about our ancestors is always really important. We live in a society so much based on the present, we forget our ancestors. And for me, often when I lose courage or when I'm scared, I try and think of the people that inspired me, our ancestors. For me, two artists who made the movements their material. One was Gustave Courbet. Courbet, a famous artist at the time, painting realism, painting the poor, not the rich. The Paris Commune happens. 72 days where people run their own city of Paris, outside of the state. A kind of utopia of 72 days where women's clubs took over churches and talked about liberation, talked about self-management. And most artists, they left, ran away, couldn't deal with the reality of real politics. All the Impressionists ran away. But Courbet stayed and organized, put down his paintbrushes and actually was involved in organizing, applying all the same methods, the creativity, and organized, for example, the pulling down of the Vendôme column, this symbol to hierarchy, to war, to empire, which didn't represent anything that the Commune was about. The Commune was about horizontality, about direct democracy, about peace. And so they organized a massive event, a festival where they brought the column down, replaced it with an alternative public monument, and in many ways, it was one of the greatest symbols of the Paris Commune. Another ancestor for me is Sylvia Pankhurst. This is her at the Royal College of Art. She was at the Royal College of Art studying, and then thought, no, I can't just make art. This is a moment where the right to votes of women, this is a historical moment. I can't just make art. And she left the Royal College and started to apply her creativity to designing suffragette movements, designing marches, designing flyers, designing teapots, designing forms of action, forms of radical direct action, and being involved in radical forms of direct action. And she realized that, and the great slogan of the suffragette movement was deeds, not words. So, number 5, give up representation. For me, this is the key. The key is, in the art world, we have this pathology of representation. I want to represent the world. For me, the key is, let's not represent it, let's transform it. Let's not make paintings about war. Let's not make operas, let's not make paintings about war. Let's not make operas about Gandhi. Let's look at social movements, because social movements, as Jamie said, are so boring. I mean, people marching from A to B with a banner that says no war or no patriarchy or no this or no. What we need to do as artists is apply our creativity to these movements and actually make them as sexy as capitalism. That's the key. Now, I was really lucky, as Jamie said, to be involved in a movement called Reclaim Streets in the 90s, and I haven't got time to talk about it now. But the key to Reclaim Streets was bringing radical pleasure into politics. The key was actually to say, look, politics can be fun. So we'd have these massive street parties in the streets, because for us, the streets was the commons. The street were commons that were privatized by the car. All the sociology shows that the more cars you have in a street, the less the neighbors talk to each other. And so we wanted to reclaim the streets for people and not machines, and create massive street parties. It was a meme in the early days of the internet. It started to spread. Street parties started to happen everywhere. And I learned an enormous amount by my involvement in this movement. And one thing I learned was the power of stories. Stories make the world up more than atoms. And a story that happened around this was the M41 Street Party. We got 8,000 people illegally onto a motorway near Shepherd's Bush. And during the event, there were these kind of big carnival figures coming up and down. And underneath the dresses, there were we also whacked things like sand onto the motorway, but underneath the dresses, there were people with jackhammers hidden from the police, drilling into the tarmac and planting trees into the motorway. And I suddenly realized that all this stuff was way more creative, way more ambitious, way more rebellious than all the contemporary art I was immersed in at the time. And the stories that were coming out of this were actually changing things. The story of the trees being planted in the motorway actually went to the Liverpool dockers. We were artists, anarchists, eco-warriors, ravers. And suddenly we started working with Liverpool dockers, totally different culture. The reason we worked with them is they heard this story. And the imagination breaks those boundaries. A story like that can break those class and culture difference boundaries. Design disobedience. So since 2003, my partner Isabelle Frémaux and I have set up a collective that we run called the Laboratory of Insurrectionary Imagination. And the idea of this laboratory is to bring artists and activists together to create new forms of civil disobedience. Because we think that artists have so much to give, so much creativity, so much capacity to think outside the box, and yet often have quite big egos and not a lot of social critique. Meanwhile, activists, a bit less ego, can work collectively much better, but often lack kind of imagination. Often, the same, what kind of leaflet shall we do? Yeah, what kind of blockade are we going to do? And so for us, bringing artists and activists together, which is the old tradition of the avant-garde from surrealism through Dada through surrealism and situationism, etc. It's nothing new. But for us, that's key, to bring artists and activists together, not to represent the world, but to transform it through new forms of civil disobedience. And so we've done loads of different forms, and I haven't got time to talk about them all. This is the clown army that Jamie talked about. This was a great moment where this clown, she would put lipstick on her lips, then kiss the riot shield, then put more lipstick, then kiss again, and in the end the whole riot shield was covered in lipstick, and somehow magically the police ran away. And it was a methodology that kind of combined clowning, real art of clowning, and disobedience, and kind of became a meme throughout the world. We also do kind of projects working with youth. This was a youth project we did where youth put illegal bench things around the city. So they made up their things and then went one night and put them all around the kind of benches as dedications around the city. We also sometimes do things with natural species. This was a project we did for the Hamburg Camp Nagel Festival, where we basically used ants that actually sabotage computers. They go into computers and cause short circuits, and we actually injected them into the banks that fund fossil-fueled corporations. And sometimes we make very, very practical tools. Like this was a project for the climate camp Heathrow, where we basically made these shields, working with photographers and so on, of people affected by climate change. And behind these shields were tents, which we would pull out when we occupied the British Airports Authority building to stop the building of the third runway at Heathrow. And so the imagery was kind of very much of the police breaking these people's faces, and of course we were protected and went through the police lines non-violently, and then took the tents out and did it. So, and sometimes, this kind of work becomes used in mainstream creative spaces, such as Design Behind the Barricades, the front cover of Creative Review. All this work, and sometimes we do all this work is always linked to social movements. For us, the movement is the material. We don't just go and do this work outside of that context. So we also work as organizers within here. For the last 5 years, we worked with the Climate Camp, which was a self-managed camp which would set up near a climate criminal and then run a camp for about 1,000 people, self-managed, with no crew. So the idea was everyone would work to set the camp up. And it would all be powered by renewables, and there'd always be an action at the end. And now we're working with the climate justice movement, which has had recent wins, such as the stopping of the drilling in the Arctic, and a recent amazing action that I was part of, and I don't know if anyone else here was part of it, where 1,500 of us went into the biggest CO2 producer in Europe, which are the lignite mines in Germany, and we stopped these machines, which are some of the biggest machines in the world, for a day. 6, don't separate your ethics from your aesthetics. Basically, what I have to say here is simple. When people talk about politics and artistic frame, they're lying, says my friend Brian Holmes, who's an amazing art critic. We were invited to do a project at the Tate Modern. It was a workshop project, 2 days workshop, and the workshop was called Disobedience Makes History. And they were very proud to have the workshop. They put it on the front page of their website. And the idea was that we would do, they wanted us to do a public intervention after the second day of the workshop, the second weekend, 2 weekends. Just before the workshop started, I got an email from one of the curators saying, we've sorted out the room, we've got the coffee, it's sold out, we're really happy. Oh, and by the way, ultimately, it's also important to be aware that we cannot host any activism directed against Tate and its sponsors. However, we very much welcome and encourage debate and reflection on the relationship between art and activism. So, who are the sponsors of the Tate? Well, it's not Arnold Schwarzenegger, it's not Tony Blair. It's this guy here. He's the ex-CEO of British Petroleum, who was the head of the committee that runs the Tate for very many, many, many years, and I think still is. And as all of you who know live in London, basically the oil companies have completely taken over most of the cultural spheres, institutional spheres of London. Why is that? Not because they want to sell more oil. It's called, you can call it art wash, you can call it green wash. It's basically to give them the social license to operate, to basically allow these corporations, who are genocidal, ecocidal corporations. One day we will look at these corporations as we now look at slave traders. Right now we're not there, but our grandchildren will probably look at these corporations like slave traders. And they're doing it just so that they have a clean image. And us as artists are responsible for helping them have that clean image every time we work here. So they send us this email. It was the best pedagogic teaching material we've ever been given. We basically projected the email onto the wall after doing a whole load of work on consensus, decision-making, and getting the students to work together, and then said, well, the workshop's called Disobedience Makes History. Do we want to obey or disobey? And they decided, after much conversation, after the curators who were in the room who'd written this, but we didn't say it was them, we just said it was a Tate, trying to sabotage it and stop it down, they decided to disobey. So then a week passed, the next workshop was going to happen, we get a call, Mr. Jordan, Madame Fremont, well, I think you should come in for a meeting. So we go into a meeting at the Tate, and they say, you can't do any action. If you do an action, you will be directly responsible for making people pay to go and see contemporary art. Well, now we know that actually the amount of money that BP gives years later through Freedom of Information Acts that organisations like Platforms spent a lot of work doing, we know that actually the amount of money that BP gives to the Tate is absolutely minute, has nothing to do with the ticket prices. At one point, we have a 4-hour discussion. At one point I say, so are you censoring us? And they go, oh, that's a really emotive word to use. And the great power of that moment actually was knowing that actually we had nothing to lose, because we didn't care about being re-invited to the Tate. For us, the ethics is more important than we don't want to separate our ethics and our aesthetics. And for us, that's the key. And so we had everything. We had all the power. They didn't know what to do. The students did a very, very basic intervention, because actually the whole thing was so sabotaged and policed by the Tate that it was very hard to do anything creative. But then BP exploded up in the Gulf of Mexico a few weeks later, and many of the students then went on to set up Liberate Tate, that now has done a load of actions that you've probably heard about. This was during the opening at the Tate, celebrating BP's 20th anniversary of funding. We had people inside with molasses hidden under their skirts, who then opened their skirts, and the molasses went all over the Tate. A whole series of different actions. And getting a big discussion around BP's social license and operate and its relationship to culture. And you can get on the front page of the Financial Times for 35 quid. That action costs 35 quid. Don't pretend to do politics. In the art world, it's very cool to be in politics now. So many shows with the word art, activism, and so on. For the COP9 in Copenhagen, we were invited by the Nuclear Contemporary Art Museum to do a centre to do a project. All the museums and the galleries do art around the COPs. So it's every time there's a UN summit, everyone is suddenly green and suddenly interested in climate. And we decided to do a project which linked to the direct action that was happening in Copenhagen. What we knew is that in Copenhagen, we'd been writing a book about utopias, and we spent a month living in Christiania there, and we saw that there were basically bikes. Danish people just leave their bikes, these beautiful bikes, they just leave them on the street. And so we thought, we will recycle these bikes and we will pick them up, recycle them and turn them into tools of disobedience, working with artists, activists, engineers, bike geeks and so on, to actually create tools of disobedience which merge the body and the machine. And so this project was going. We were also in collaboration with the Arnolfini Gallery in Bristol. And the idea was we'd do workshops in the Arnolfini, do prototypes, and then take them over to Copenhagen. Then I get a call from the curator in Copenhagen. She says, oh, hi, John. We knew that we couldn't do welding in either gallery. So we'd arranged to have a shipping container outside the gallery, which was great. It was much more public interface space and so on. And the curator rings me and she goes, oh, John, we've got the shipping container. It's great. You're coming in 8 weeks. Fantastic. I just wanted to say I've had a little conversation with the Danish police. It's like, okay. Yeah, there's rules about what is a bicycle in Denmark. So a bicycle can't have more than 4 wheels, can't be more than 3 meters long, can't be more than 2 meters high. And if you go outside of those rules, then actually you'll have to do the design, send it to the police, and it could take 3 weeks before it comes back. I'm like, okay, that's super interesting, but we're doing civil disobedience. We don't care if they're legal or not. And she's like, you're really going to do it? And I'm like, well, the word civil disobedience was about 15 times in the proposal that you asked us to write, and you've seen our website and you know what's going on. And it was once again this pathology of representation within the art world, thinking that we were going to pretend to do politics. So she pulled out, they pulled out. We did the show in the Arnolfini. The director of the Arnolfini at the time publicly said to us in a conference, if this was in Copenhagen, I would not be supporting this project, but it's a long way away, so I don't mind supporting it. I'm just supporting the workshop to build the things. So we built the prototypes. We did a whole load of workshops on teaching people to mend their bikes and so on in the gallery, built some prototypes, and then went to Copenhagen. So some of the, this was one of the projects. It was called the Double Trouble, the DDT. We had about 15 of these built. But then we realized that actually it was the swarm of the bikes that was most important, the way the bikes move as a swarm. So we actually just mended basic bikes and actually set up a whole lot of choreography and training for people to use those bikes and to make decisions quickly on those bikes, and that would be the form of disobedience, to actually use the bikes to lure the police away, because we realized the police were going to be extremely violent. And as Jamie said, during the legal demonstration in Copenhagen, the police surrounded 1,000 people who were doing nothing and put them in cages. Many of these people then got a lot of money back because it was a totally illegal action. Why did they do it? They did it because they don't want people to find the solutions to climate change. They want corporations and governments. I mean, there's not much difference between a corporation and a government now, we know that. But they want them to have the solutions, they don't want us. And so they wanted to create fear. They wanted to create a climate of fear. They then came and raided the legal squat that we had, where we, instead of the museum, because the museum pulled out, and they did this big theatre piece where they came with big lights and took the double troubles away and put on the front page, now, we have the war bikes. But we still had lots of the normal bikes, and we basically used those to actually protect people from police violence. And seeing as it wasn't people's own bikes, they were kind of disposable, so they made very, very good barricades to stop the police running into the crowd, which was made up of a lot of indigenous people, people from frontline communities, and so on. But the most important thing of all this work is actually the friendships, the radical friendships that we create. It's not... we have 200 people working, welding, finding bikes, designing things in this kind of hothouse of disobedience and creativity. And it's an incredible moment. And it's the friendships that come out of that, which for us are much more important. And now I'm going to pass over to a great friend, Robbie, who's going to talk about their practice, and then we're going to talk about what's happening in Paris.
Hi, thanks very much for that, John. It's really nice to see that whole history stuff that John's talked about, because actually I'm a bit younger than John, and all that stuff was really inspiring to me when I first got involved. I'd pick up a skateboarding magazine and read about Reclaim the Streets next to a skate article, and then it's really great to hear the backstory of it all. My name is Robbie. I'm involved, as Jamie said, with Reclaim the Power. We're a UK-based direct action network that are looking at economic, environmental and social injustices and trying to take action on those themes. Last few years we've done a lot of work around in solidarity with communities affected by fracking. We've held mass action camps, very much inspired by the climate camps that John talked about, with local communities at sites where the fracking industry wants to set up. Where we came from, though, is a direct action culture. We inherited our history from Reclaim the Streets, from Climate Camp, and in 2012, a group of people occupied a new gas-fired power station in West Burton in Nottinghamshire and stayed there for a week and shut the power station down. It was just after Hurricane Sandy, which was battering New York. And out of that action, people got together and said, hey, let's continue to push in a grassroots, disobedient way for climate justice in the UK. One of the ideas that we inherited from those around us was actually inherited from Liberate Tate, who had got hold of a large 56-foot wind turbine blade. Not sure from where, somewhere in Wales apparently. And the Liberate Tate had taken it into the turbine hall of the Tate Modern and donated it as a gift to talk about the relationship between oil sponsorships and renewable energy. So we got hold of this wind turbine blade and thought, well, we've still got it. The Tate gave it back. They didn't want it as a gift, apparently. So a group of us got together and thought, well, where could we put it? And what do we want to say about the fracking, how fracking is affecting communities around us today? This is a site at Barton Moss. This is a coal bed methane, another form of extreme energy extraction. So we took this wind turbine, and early in the morning, a group of people unloaded it from a truck, assembled it quickly, and lay it across the gates of this fracking site to say no to fracking, but yes to renewables. And as I listened to a lot of the stuff that John was talking about, there was, for me, and always an importance to say yes to something whilst you're also saying no. So a lot of social change, protest-based aesthetics often have the no as the sort of forefront visual or the forefront aesthetic. And for some of the stuff that the lab does that was really inspiring is to use the yes in your confrontation. So here we took a wind turbine blade and used it to blockade a fracking site. And it was Christmas time, so as you always do around Christmas, you sort of get a Santa to stand for selfies. But that's not actually what I wanted to talk about tonight. I was just being in Paris, talking to some, getting involved in the planning meetings for the mobilisation happening there in December. He said to me, well, I'm doing a talk at Central St Martin's Art College. What can I talk about? And I wanted to continue a conversation that I've been very interested in for a long time about the role between advertising and climate change, and to try and draw out the links between these two subjects a little bit. So here we have a sort of perhaps an exaggerated form, or an exaggerated picture, but an image of outdoor advertising, corporate-controlled outdoor advertising, penetrating and dominating our public space. I read recently that on average we're exposed to 3,500 advertising messages a day, and in London, on an average London commute, people will be exposed to, in a 45-minute commute, you'll be exposed to 150 messages a day. What's this got to do with Paris? What's it got to do with climate change? Well, for a long time, many different groups have been using their art to confront the advertising industry. So looking back, this is a crew from Australia called Bugger Up, which stands for Billboard Utilising Graffitiists Against Unhealthy Promotions. And they were a group who in the 1980s, when it's hard to imagine it now, but when cigarette advertising was still prominent, as it was in the UK until maybe 1997, 98, something like that, they would go and deface and detorn and change cigarette advertising. And they do this quite publicly, often with doctors coming out with them on sort of mass public art outings. I'm not sure what the word is. I don't actually have an arts background myself, but I was very interested to see this relationship. So that's some of the history of, or more recent history of anti-advertising. But there seems to be a resurgence of these tactics being used in the UK. This is a crew called Brandalism, and they're based in Britain, and they've been looking at the world around them, looking at the spaces around them, the big billboards, the bus stops, other advertising spaces, and thinking, well, we're just exposed to this corporate advertising all the time. Maybe we could use these spaces for art. And maybe we could use artworks that critique advertising and critique its relationship with capitalism, with consumerism, and how that's playing into an economic system that is exacerbating the climate crisis. So, in 2012, this group took a load of artworks and installed them in 36 different billboards around the UK. There was artworks which talked about the relationship between fossil fuels and consumption and climate change and advertising. This is artwork by Polyp. There was artworks that talked about the relationship between the riots and advertising as well. This was a piece by Bill Posters. He took a famous Nike advert, added in 2 shops that were heavily looted during the 2011 summer riots, Foot Locker and JD Sports, and tried to draw that link out there. Other artists picked up on a much more established critique about the impact of advertising and body image and our well-being, and how that is negatively affecting us and promoting certain beauty standards, which can really undermine our self-esteem. So Hannah Adamazek picked up that theme. And it wasn't just billboards that were available as canvases. This is a bus stop advertising, and back 2 years ago, this Brandalism crew went back out into the streets, this time in 10 different UK cities with 365 artworks, and installed them in a couple of days at night or in the daytime with more artwork to draw out these themes again. So we'll just take a quick look at some of them. It's by Paul Insect. These were installed in Manchester and London and Bristol and Leeds and Oxford and Brighton. This is a piece by Ron English, this famous US street artist. So, this tactic of reclaiming public space or talking about the corporate control of the visual realm, it's been taken off more recently as well. There's a crew called the Special Patrol Group, and they did some stuff around the recent arms fair, which takes place twice biannually at Excel Centre. And a group of them went out on the tube and installed these, it's a bit fuzzy there, but installed these artworks that, or sort of spoof public information adverts that talked about the arms fair across 300 or 400 different tube line spaces and the DLR and other spaces like that. So here they were imitating, in a kind of, talking about Paris, in the French way of detourning the original adverts or the original marketing material of companies like BAE Systems or the British government or the Arms Fair itself or the Transport for London would take the original and just spin it a little bit. Recently, had the pleasure of going down to Dismaland, Banksy's weird dystopian theme parks. Anyone been to Dismaland here? Yeah. Anyone got a quick opinion on how they found it? Yeah, I went down for a day to help out with the special patrol group who were handing out these ad space hack packs, and these I was amazed they were doing it so brazenly. I went down to help out, just selling these packs to people who were coming along to Dismaland, and these packs will get you into the bus stop spaces, and you can see here they were doing demonstrations to families. They had a real life cabinet there, which I don't know where they got hold of it from, but it's part of Dismaland. And there were sort of families, mother and father and young 10-year-old kids going, oh, right, can I get one as well? How much is it? And they said, oh, here you go, here's some money. Get one of those, right? And then you could go on a little demonstration and learn how to get into these spaces. And I realised, actually, discontent at advertising is perhaps more widespread than I previously considered it. So that was the Special Patrol Group. They've been using this tactic of reclaiming public space, reclaiming art, corporate-controlled advertising spaces to talk about different issues like police violence or police racism. And that tactic is also available of whatever types of topics we want to talk about. This is a Metropolitan Police advert being detained again, spoofing the original. Last thing I want to mention before we go back to look at what's happening in Paris and the types of actions that are happening there is a different response to outdoor advertising. This is a crew called EPOS 257. They built a paint cannon out of homemade materials and used it to sort of fire large paint, I don't know what the word, artillery rounds or at billboards in the Czech Republic. So kind of making them their own canvases as well, but perhaps in a more sort of urban guerrilla style. And lastly, we're talking about hacking the visual realm, hacking public space. Another Czech crew called Zaythoven. So I found this particularly inspiring piece. They wanted to talk about the control of the media and how the media shapes public discourse and how that's linked to advertising as well. And they managed to hack into a live weather forecast and superimpose onto it a nuclear bomb going off in the background, sending the Czech Republic into a quick panic about what was happening on this particular weather forecast. So it doesn't directly link, but I found it a particularly audacious act, and if there's anything that's been brought up in his talk tonight, it's about the need for audacity. So, John, I'm going to finish, but we are going to talk about the Climate Games and how you can get involved in Paris. Because I was in Paris this weekend just gone, and they also have anti-advertising crews out there. They're called Anti-Publicité. They've got a Paris group called the Brigade Anti-Publicité, and they're meeting every Wednesday and designing artwork to put out into the streets for the COP. So it's one of the ways that people who are going to Paris, and I would encourage you all to come, how you can get involved. But first, we're going to hear a little bit more about the Climate Games and what's planned for the actions.
So quick, for those who don't know about the COP, it's 20 years since they've been meeting, hence Cop21, it's the 21st. Anyone guess how, well no, we'll get there later actually. So it's happening in an airport, great. It's not actually happening in Paris, it's happening in Saint-Denis, but that's a detail. It's happening in a private airport, no paradox there. And for 20 years, they've been talking. In fact, if you add up all the talking, they've talked for a whole year. 196 companies, governments, oops, that was a Freudian slip, have talked for an entire year. And does anyone know how much CO2 has been reduced in those 20 years of talking? 0, yeah. More than 0 has been produced. 63%, bang on! Wow, good audience here. Yes. You read Naomi Klein's book, didn't you? Okay, so the Cop21 is not a level playing field, and this is what we've got to really remember. Delegations like the American delegation, they'll bring a couple of hundred people with their delegation. People from Sudan and Somalia will probably bring one. In the Copenhagen talks, there were 1 delegate. So in the Copenhagen talks, there were sometimes 26 meetings happening in parallel. And if you're 1 delegate, of course, you can't go to all those meetings. Friends of mine who were inside the process in Copenhagen saw people from African delegations banging on the doors to try and get into meetings, okay, just saying, you need to let us in. And the rich countries, the Annex I countries, are actually having these secret meetings. So the thing is completely unequal in the UN. The French government said, we've got austerity, we can't fund the whole thing with public money, so we'll get 21 sponsors to sponsor the COP. Isn't that great? So it's going to be a public-private thing with, Suez Environment, they've been lobbying for fracking. Renault, well, it's a car company. Air France, well, it's an airline company. Engie, they have coal-fired power stations. BNP Paribas, well, they fund loads of coal. So basically, the whole thing is, oh yes, we mustn't forget Louis Vuitton, because after all, Paris is this place of luxury, and they've also funded the COP. But Paris is also the place where art and activism came together so much, especially within situationism, this desire to dissolve any boundary between what is artistic and what is political. And so the Climate Games comes from that kind of desire, because the situationists also said that the greatest political tool was play and games, and the best thing was to wrong foot the enemy. And so the climate... Oh, the sun's just set. Okay, it's going to go all yellow. I've got that thing on my phone. Okay, it's going to be... That's really annoying. Okay, it's going to be all yellow. Sorry, the sun just set. You should have that on your map, by the way. It's really good. It saves your eyes and your pineal gland. Anyway, we are nature defending itself is the slogan of the Climate Games. And we'll just show the trailer.
This is the mesh. It is everywhere. Some say it can't be defeated. But what if we cracked it open? Would we be nature defending itself? Climate Games, the world's largest disobedient action-adventure game. In Paris, across cyberspace, and beyond. Your objective, to join the global movements, swarming to shift the game against profit, in favor of life. We are not fighting for nature. We are nature, defending itself.
So the idea of the Climate Games was developed by a group in Amsterdam 2 years ago. And we, for Paris, are kind of souping it up and making it a bit much bigger. Basically, it comes from the notion that actually mobile phones and that kind of technology are increasingly used in moments of resistance, whether it's Gezi Park or the Arab Spring, or even in Hong Kong, this incredible image of all of the people in the Hong Kong democracy movement using their mobile phones to make a constellation. And the idea is very basic. It's basically to create a framework to enable different types of action, which could range. In the last Climate Games in Amsterdam, they did this summer when about 200 people took place. There were all sorts of different actions, ranging from just setting up a weather balloon with a text by the coal power station, to kind of actions with inflatables and sailors to try and block the power station, to more hardcore things like planting trees on the lines taking the trains full of coal to be burned. So for the Climate Games for Paris, we did a whole series of hackathons where we brought artists and activists and gamers and developers and coders. We did 3 of them in different cultural centres, in the Berliner Festspiel, big theatre in Germany, and different theatres in Europe, in Belgium and London. And we're basically developing this framework, which is fundamentally a website, and the idea of the Climate Games is that the street and the web merge together. So basically you have an application which is a mapping application, and the application will show you where you can crowdsource, put your own target on the map. So you can show where maybe some of the sponsors might be having their little events, breakfast events, or where some of the lobbyists could be staying in their hotels and so on. And you put it on the map. And then also when you do your action, you can actually put your action and images and so on the map. Now this is all done completely anonymously, and a lot of the work with the hackers and so on is to make it anonymous. And the idea is that you work in teams. So each team goes off and does its action, and of course there's also always Team Blue. And Team Blue always want to spoil the fun of the Climate Games. So Team Blue are the police, and there'll be people during the Climate Games who will actually be putting the police positions on the map as well. So you'll have this live map of resistance showing where targets are, where actions are, and where the police are. And of course there'll be awards, because all games need awards, and there'll be 21 different awards for different things that, I mean, it's a bit tongue-in-cheek, but things like the funniest action. It's called the Piss Myself Cup, and you'll get it for the funniest action, and it will be crowdsourced. They'll be voted by the crowd, by all the people taking part. There'll also be the most effective action. There'll be the Courage Cup, which is for teams which have brought people into civil disobedience who've never done disobedience before, and things like that. So there'll be 21 different awards and an award ceremony at the end. And there are 2 rounds. Round 1 is going to be on the first day of the COP on the 30th of November, and the goal will be greenwashing, and round 2 will be during the Redlines action, December the 11th and 12th. The first round will be looking at all the greenwashing, including the Solutions Cop21 event, which is the biggest kind of great festival of greenwashing, which is going to be happening in Paris, where all the corporations will show us what great solutions they have to the climate catastrophe, including people like this who actually do all the electrics for the coal-fired power stations and the oil companies and so on. And for the second round, for the red lines, the idea is this. The idea is that there are red lines for a minimal planet. Red lines that cannot be crossed for a just and livable planet. And that the agreement, as we saw before, will go over 3 degrees. It will cross these red lines. So what people will do is actually, I'm not going to do this, sorry. I'm going to go faster than this. So what will happen, it could be the biggest act of civil disobedience for climate justice ever to happen in Europe and possibly the world. So on the 11th and 12th of December, what people will do is they will converge around the conference hall and they will place red lines around it, symbolically to say, you have crossed the red lines and we will have the last word. The corporations and the governments cannot have the last word. Your agreement is going to be a death sentence for the planet and the poor, and it's us, the movements, who are going to do the work. You're not going to do the work. You're not going to be shutting down the infrastructure that we need to shut down to stop us going into climate catastrophe. And so we're working with a lot of artists and movements to develop this, and you're going to be working, and Adam's going to explain this, working on the Red Lines theme, doing the art builds. And the idea is, one of the projects we're working on is to take one of the icons of Paris rebellions, which is the cobblestone, and actually work with an art group called Tools for Action, who make inflatable cobblestones. And I'll just quickly...
Cubo hinchable que refleja la luz. El objetivo es dificultar las cargas de los antidisturbios e impedir que graben imágenes. El reflectocubo ya se ha usado en manifestaciones de toda Europa. En Internet se dan instrucciones para poder fabricarlo.
Esto es un reflectocubo. Sus creadores lo llaman la nueva barricada del siglo XXI. Se usan las manifestaciones para entorpecer el paso de los agentes y evitar cargas policiales. Esto es Berlín, y así pelea este policía contra el hinchable. Lo pincha, lo vuelve a pinchar, pero no se desinfla, mientras los manifestantes aprovechan para huir y finalmente el policía lo abandona porque no puede con él. Aseguran que es un arma invencible, así lo llaman en esta página web, donde encontramos tutoriales para aprender a confeccionarlo. En Barcelona ya lo han probado, los Mossos acabaron incautando uno de ellos en una manifestación. Aseguran que están encantados con el nuevo invento.
Y a nosotros disuadir no nos disuade. De hecho, preferimos que nos tiren estas cosas que no piedras, lanzas o objetos contundentes, ¿no?
Pero el reflectocubo tiene más funciones. Está hecho de tela asfáltica plateada para deslumbrar a los policías y evitar que les hagan fotos a los manifestantes.
Esta es la única molestia que puede causar y el único peligro que puede tener este tipo de material.
Sus creadores se lo toman con humor. Saben que poco pueden hacer ante un grupo de policías armados, pero con los reflectocubos pretenden eliminar la violencia y la tensión que se genera en estas concentraciones.
So the idea is to build red lines, to build hundreds of these. We're going to have an art space where people will learn how to make them and so on. The art space will be open from November the 1st in Paris. Anyone can come to build their own tools of resistance, but also if they want to help make these. And we'll be drawing these red lines with these kind of barricades around the Bourget centre as a kind of modular thing. And so you're all welcome to come to Paris. I think Adam's now going to talk about the art build and Lucy's event on the 20th. And the most important thing is that we have the last word in Paris, that it's not the corporations, that Hollande and the governments of the world don't go up on the main stage, on the media stage on the 12th of December and go, we've signed the agreement that's going to save the planet, when we all know it's not at all going to save the planet, and it's us, the movements and the people that say we have the solutions.
Thank you very much for that. Fantastic. Well, I'm looking forward to it. And basically, if I can get onto here, then what we're up to is yeah, if you can. If I can open it up.
Just while he finds that slide, what this is working towards through Adam, who I'm working with, is on November the 21st, we're going to have what's called an art build in the street here. And that's why we wanted to have this meeting earlier on this evening, so that we can find how many of you want to get on board and help us make it really fly. And he's got a nifty slide or something. Is that what you want to show? Okay.
But basically, it starts today on the 15th, obviously we're having this conversation about climate games, about red lines, about what artists and designers can do. On the 20th, Lucy is hosting an event here again. On the 21st, we've got the streets booked so far, which is the bit outside here. But obviously we need more staff and students who have access to the studios, where the sewing machines are, where the printing facilities are, to be able to come in on the 21st, which is a Saturday, so that we can go into other parts of the building and use those resources to be able to design, make, and then on the 29th, on the eve of the COP, in London there will be demonstrations where we can do some of these activities that we're designing. And then obviously on December the 12th, there's opportunities there if people want to go and use the thing they've designed and created in Paris, then great too. If we come up with some really good ideas whilst we're working together that we think actually other people might like to have a go at and join up in Paris with their own one of whatever it is that we've created, then we can post that on Climate Games as well. And perhaps with some plans on, this is what we've made, this is why we think it's good, this is why we think it works well, and you can make your own one too, you could come along too, and there could be a bunch of us that are doing this with a similar idea. So basically we can share ideas, we can create our own ideas, and can create our own materials, and have a lot of fun doing it is what I'm expecting, and what I'm going to be a part of with Jamie and any others of you that want to get involved with that. obviously, between now and the 21st, there's a month. 21st is the first opportunity we've got to be able to get any space in CSM. But if we want to, we've all got email addresses through the sign-up, so we'll be in touch with you all. And if we want to meet up on a weekly basis just to see what people are up to, share ideas, offer each other a bit of support, maybe there's something that we need access to, a new idea, a new skill, some sort of materials that we can't get hold of, maybe we can help each other out like that on a more regular basis. So today's the start of the idea. 20th is the next time we'll come together, and I'll hand over to Lucy to have a chat about that in a minute. And 21st, we're going to be here together, and the more staff and students that can be involved with that, the more facilities we'll have to be able to do more good stuff. So if people will be in touch with you soon, we can meet up on a weekly basis to have a chat about how things are going, and 21st is when we can start to implement the next bit of it in terms of the activity. 20th.
Yeah, thanks, Robbie. Thanks, John. Amazing what you're doing, really inspiring. I don't want to hijack anything, but on the 20th of November, there's going to be another talk with two artists. Well, that's me, and Ackroyd and Harvey, Dan and Heather, and with a philosopher and the founder of Cole, which is an organisation for the arts and environments based in Paris. And they're going to and David Buckland as well from Cape Farewell. They've joined forces and they're working on a project called Cop21, which is uniting art events, and that's in theatre, that's in architecture, that's in the arts, visual arts, right across the board. They're uniting events globally for the Cop21. So if you're interested in other things that are happening in Paris during the climate summit, Cop21 is a website you should go and visit, and we'll be talking about that on the 20th of November, so come along if you can. Thanks.
Okay, we've got very little time for quick Q&A. We wanted loads of time, but we really want some Q&A, but there's a couple of points to make as well. Do you want to do a question?
I've got a very quick announcement to make, which is directly relevant to this discussion. We are currently campaigning to ask UAL to divest from fossil fuels, and we're running a campaign called UAL Divest. It's probably 2 months old, and we have a petition online. We have a website now as well. If you'd like to find out more, please go to UAL Divest on Facebook, and you can have a look at our website there. If you go to the section that says Get Involved, we have an email address, and we'd love you to please join us on our campaign, a very practical way to combat climate change and mobilise the student population, who also will be organising direct actions, and we'd love to collaborate in the way that we've been speaking about this evening, and thank you for listening.
Obviously at the end, I mean, we were going to have a long Q&A time, we're not going to have time for that, but we're definitely going to the pub, aren't we? Yeah? So we've got 10 minutes, okay, so some Q&A. Two things I want to draw your attention to. One is over here, so here's some of the propaganda for climategames.net. It's really easy to get involved in it. I'm going to pass over to Robbie for the last word, but thank you to Robbie and John for coming over. John's just come over from Paris today for this. I'd like to say thank you to them one more time. It's been brilliant. I found it really inspiring. If I didn't know anything about it, it blew my mind. Not only for what they're saying, because also what they do. I mean, some of the things that Robbie's done is some of the bravest stuff I've ever seen activists do. He's phenomenal, and it's an honour to work with people like this. That's climategames.net. There's the propaganda. He's got a very important announcement about travel. You know, it's being in Paris on December the 12th. It's being there, okay? Obviously, for a lot of people, they're excluded financially, but Reclaim the Power can help you with exactly that thing.
Cheers, Jamie. It's not just about being there, but it's about getting there early. So there's loads of different transport options. To get to Paris, Reclaim the Power are putting on £20 single coaches, leaving on Saturday the 5th of December, a week before the big action on Saturday the 12th of December. And the lesson from the actions this summer that I took part in was the earlier you get there, the better you can prepare, the more reconnaissance you can do, and your preparations can be that much more effective for a really great action. So in Paris, there's squatter networks opening up art houses across the city. They're providing accommodation. There's accommodation in sports halls, in people's homes. Paris is welcoming 50,000 people from civil society society. So come along, there's transport, there's trains as well, there's a Eurostar for 70 quid return. All the information is on this flyer, and it'd be great to see people there.